There is a circuit in your brain actively destroying your ability to feel satisfaction. Evolution put it there 200,000 years ago to keep you alive. Silicon Valley hacked it 15 years ago to keep you scrolling. Right now, as you listen to this, that circuit is misfiring. It is flooding your system with a chemical your body was never designed to handle in these quantities. The chemical is dopamine. The process is called neural downregulation. The result is a phenomenon that feels like depression, but shows up on brain scans as something closer to addiction. You are not lazy. You are not broken. You are experiencing the predictable outcome of exposing Stone Age hardware to digital age stimuli. Let me be very clear about what is happening inside your skull right now. Every time you open Instagram, every time you click on a pornography tab, every time you refresh your email for the 17th time in an hour, you are training your brain to crave higher and higher levels of stimulation just to feel normal. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable cellular biology. Your dopamine receptors are physically changing shape. The neurons in your ventral tegmental area are burning out like overworked light bulbs. The circuits that used to fire when you accomplished something real, when you connected with another human being, when you created something with your hands, those circuits are going silent. They are being outcompeted by circuits that fire when you see a notification, when you get a like, when the algorithm serves you exactly what your reptilian brain wants before your conscious mind even knows it wants it. Here is what makes this particularly vicious. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical. That is a fundamental misunderstanding that has ruined millions of lives. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It is the wanting chemical. It fires hardest, not when you get the reward, but in the moment before you get the reward. This is why you can scroll for 3 hours and feel worse than when you started. This is why you can watch pornography until 4 in the morning and wake up feeling hollow. This is why you can eat an entire bag of chips and still be searching the cupboards 10 minutes later. You are not getting satisfaction. You are getting anticipation. Your brain is stuck in an infinite loop of wanting without ever arriving at having. Robert Sapolsky at Stanford has spent 40 years documenting what happens when you give primates more reward than their neurobiology can handle. The pattern is consistent across species. First comes tolerance. The thing that used to excite you stops working. You need more. Then comes withdrawal. When you try to stop, your baseline drops below where it was before you started. You do not just return to normal, you fall into a pit. Then comes the restructuring. Your brain physically rewires itself around the source of the stimulation. It becomes your new normal. Everything else becomes boring by comparison. Food tastes bland. Conversations feel slow. Work feels impossible. Sex feels empty. Not because those things have changed, but because your ability to experience them has been chemically compromised. This is not happening to you because you lack discipline. This is happening to you because you are a biological machine designed to survive in an environment that no longer exists. 10,000 years ago, dopamine spikes happened maybe twice a day. You found food. You found a mate. The rest of the time, your brain was basically neutral. There was no such thing as chronic overstimulation because there was nothing around capable of delivering it. Fast forward to today. You carry a device in your pocket that can deliver more dopamine hits in 10 minutes than your ancestors got in a month. The apps on that device were designed by teams of neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists whose entire job is to hack the exact circuits we are talking about. They are not trying to make you happy. They are trying to make you compulsive. And they are winning. Here is the part that should terrify you. This is not just affecting your mood. This is affecting your ability to think. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for planning, decision-making, impulse control, everything that makes you a functional adult. That part runs on dopamine. When you flood your system with cheap dopamine from external sources, your prefrontal cortex stops producing its own. It becomes dependent. This is why you cannot focus anymore. This is why you start projects and never finish them. This is why you know exactly what you should be doing, but you cannot make yourself do it. Your executive function has been outsourced to an algorithm. There is a study out of China that scanned the brains of people who spent more than 6 hours a day on their phones. The results looked identical to the brains of cocaine addicts. Same reduction in gray matter in the prefrontal cortex, same hyperactivity in the reward centers, same difficulty experiencing pleasure from natural rewards. The smartphone users were not shooting cocaine. They were just scrolling, but their brains could not tell the difference. Because to your brain, a dopamine spike is a dopamine spike. It does not matter if it came from a substance or a screen. The biological result is the same. Now here is where it gets personal. I want you to think about the last time you felt genuinely proud of yourself. Not the shallow validation of a like or a comment. I mean the deep cellular satisfaction of building something that mattered, of pushing through resistance and coming out the other side, of doing something hard and knowing you did it well. When was that? If you have to think for more than 5 seconds, that is your first sign. If you cannot remember at all, that is your confirmation. Your dopamine system has been rewired around passive consumption. Active creation feels like pulling teeth because your brain is no longer wired to reward it. Let me pause here for a second and ask you a question that maybe no one has ever asked you. What is the worst part of living with this internal struggle? Not what you tell people, but the part you carry in silence. I want you to know something. What you are feeling is more common than you imagine. Thousands of people are watching this video right now, carrying exactly the same weight. If you have the courage, leave a comment telling me what is the hardest part for you. Your honesty might make someone else feel less alone today. Now let me continue showing you how to break this pattern. The scientific term for what you are experiencing is anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. But that term makes it sound like a personality flaw. Like something is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. What is wrong is the environment. You are a perfectly functional biological system, responding exactly as designed to stimuli that should not exist. The problem is not your brain. The problem is what you are putting into your brain. And that means the solution is not about fixing yourself. The solution is about redesigning your environment. Here is what needs to happen at a cellular level for your brain to recover. Your dopamine receptors need time to upregulate. That means they need to physically rebuild themselves. This process takes between 2 weeks and 90 days, depending on how deep the hole is. During that time, everything is going to feel worse before it feels better. This is not a side effect. This is the main effect. Your brain is detoxing. The circuits that have been overstimulated are going quiet. The circuits that have been neglected are trying to wake back up. This feels like depression. It feels like restlessness. It feels like crawling out of your skin. That feeling is not a sign you are doing it wrong. That feeling is confirmation you are doing it right. Here is the protocol. This is not a suggestion. This is biological maintenance. You do not get to negotiate with your neurology. You can either follow the process or you can stay stuck. There is no third option. Phase 1 is elimination. You need to remove every source of cheap dopamine for a minimum of 14 days. That means no social media, no pornography, no video games, no binge watching, no junk food, no compulsive news checking, no dating apps. I can already hear the objections forming in your head. I need my phone for work. I need to stay informed. I need to relax. No. You need to let your dopamine receptors rebuild. Everything else is negotiable. This is not. During these 14 days, your brain is going to scream at you. It is going to tell you that you are missing out, that you are falling behind, that you are being unreasonable. That voice is not you. That voice is your dopamine system in withdrawal. It is a 2-year-old throwing a tantrum because you took away its candy. You do not reason with a 2-year-old. You wait for the tantrum to pass. The same applies here. You do not fight the urge. You observe it, you name it. You let it exist without acting on it. Seneca called this voluntary discomfort. You are deliberately putting yourself in a state of wanting without satisfying the want. This is how you rebuild impulse control. Not by being strong, by being patient. Phase 2 is substitution. Once you have cleared the system, you need to give your brain something to do. This is critical. You cannot just leave a void. Nature abhors a vacuum. Your brain will fill the space with whatever is available. If you do not give it a healthy target, it will default back to the old pattern. The replacement activities need to meet 3 criteria. They need to require effort. They need to produce tangible results. They need to exist in the physical world, not the digital world. This is where most people fail. They think they can replace scrolling with reading articles on their phone. They think they can replace video games with educational YouTube videos. No. The problem is not the content. The problem is the medium. Your brain cannot tell the difference between productive screen time and unproductive screen time. A screen is a screen. A notification is a notification. If you are serious about resetting your dopamine system, you need to get offline, completely. For the entire reset period, what do you do instead? You move your body. You build something with your hands. You have conversations that cannot be interrupted by a device. You cook real food from real ingredients. You read physical books that require you to turn pages and remember where you left off. You write with a pen on paper. You walk without headphones. You sit with boredom until it stops feeling like torture and starts feeling like peace. These activities sound trivial because we have been conditioned to believe that anything that does not produce instant gratification is a waste of time. That conditioning is exactly what we are trying to break. The neuroscience here is straightforward. Your brain releases dopamine in response to novelty and challenge, not in response to ease. The harder something is, the bigger the dopamine response when you complete it. But there is a lag. Your brain does not reward you in the moment, it rewards you after. This is why scrolling feels better than reading. This is why fast food tastes better than vegetables. This is why pornography feels more intense than actual intimacy. The cheap version gives you the hit immediately. The real version makes you wait. But the real version is the only version that rebuilds your dopamine sensitivity. The cheap version keeps you trapped. Here is what happens around day 7 if you actually follow this protocol. You are going to have a moment of clarity. It will probably happen during a walk or in the shower or right before you fall asleep. Your mind will suddenly feel different, quieter, less scattered. You will realize you have not thought about checking your phone in several hours. You will notice that you can finish a thought without your attention splintering into 12 different directions. This is your prefrontal cortex coming back online. This is your dopamine receptors starting to rebuild. Do not mistake this for the finish line. This is the starting line. This is when the real work begins. Phase 3 is reintegration. After the reset period, you do not go back to normal. Normal is what got you here. You establish new boundaries. You decide in advance what you are letting back in and under what conditions. Social media gets 10 minutes a day and only on a laptop, never on your phone. Pornography does not come back at all. Video games get 1 hour on weekends if everything else is handled first. Junk food becomes a once-a-week event, not a daily default. These are not punishments. These are maintenance protocols. You are managing a system that is prone to malfunction. You do not get to be careless with it. The principle here comes directly from Stoic philosophy. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Your inability to feel satisfaction is not the problem. It is the information. It is your biology telling you that something in your environment is misaligned with your design. The urge to scroll is not a weakness. It is a signal. It is your dopamine system crying out for novelty and challenge and meaning. The problem is that you have been feeding it empty calories. The solution is not to suppress the urge. The solution is to redirect it towards something that actually satisfies the biological need. Here is the uncomfortable truth that most self-help content will not tell you. You are not going to want to do this. Wanting is the problem. You are waiting to feel motivated before you start. Motivation is a dopamine response. You do not have dopamine to spare right now. You are operating on fumes, so you do not wait for motivation. You act without it. You do the thing when you least feel like doing it. Not because it feels good, but because it is the biological requirement for feeling good later. This is the entire teaching of Stoicism in one sentence. You do not control outcomes. You control actions. You take the action. The outcome follows. There is a concept in neuroscience called Hebbian learning. Neurons that fire together wire together. Every time you pair an action with a reward, you strengthen that connection. Every time you break that pairing, you weaken it. Right now, your brain has strong connections between phone and dopamine, between food and dopamine, between screen and dopamine. You need to build new connections between effort and dopamine, between creation and dopamine, between discomfort and dopamine. This does not happen through insight. This does not happen through understanding. This happens through repetition. You have to physically practice the new pattern enough times that it becomes the default. How many times? The research varies, but the average is around 66 days for a new behavior to become automatic. That is not 66 days of trying. That is 66 days of doing. Missing a day does not reset the clock, but it does slow the process. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. You do not need to be perfect. You need to be persistent. 1 push-up every day beats 10 push-ups once a week. 1 page of writing every day beats a novel attempted once a month. Small actions repeated daily rewire the brain faster than grand gestures attempted occasionally. Here is what no one tells you about dopamine detox. The goal is not to eliminate pleasure. The goal is to recalibrate your sensitivity. A brain that has been overstimulated needs increasingly extreme stimuli just to feel normal. A brain that has been reset can derive profound satisfaction from simple things. This is not about becoming a monk. This is about becoming functional, about being able to enjoy a meal without needing it to be drenched in sugar and salt, about being able to have a conversation without needing it to be constantly entertaining, about being able to work on something for more than 10 minutes without needing a dopamine hit to keep you going. There is a study from the University of Michigan that tracked people who did a full digital detox for 30 days. At the end of the month, 90% reported better sleep, 80% reported improved focus, 70% reported a decrease in anxiety. But here is the most interesting part. When they were allowed to reintroduce technology, most of them chose not to. Not because they were afraid of relapsing, because they genuinely did not want it anymore. The things that used to feel essential felt trivial. The things that used to feel boring felt engaging. Their dopamine baseline had reset. They were no longer chasing stimulation. They were experiencing satisfaction. This is the part where I need to address the most common objection, but I am not addicted. I can stop whenever I want. I just do not want to. That sentence is the defining characteristic of addiction. Every addict believes they are in control right up until they try to stop. Then they discover that the circuit has more say in their behavior than their conscious mind does. If you truly believe you can stop, prove it. Not to me, to yourself. Take the 14-day challenge. Remove every source of cheap dopamine. If it is easy, I am wrong. If it is hard, you have your answer. Here is the reality that most people do not want to face. You are not going to do this. You are going to listen to this entire video. You are going to nod along. You are going to think about how much sense it makes. And then you are going to go right back to scrolling. Because knowing what to do and doing what you know are separated by the exact circuit we have been talking about. Your prefrontal cortex understands the logic. Your limbic system does not care. It wants the dopamine. It wants it now. And unless you actively intervene, the limbic system wins. Every time. So what separates the people who actually change from the people who just think about changing? It is not willpower. Willpower is a dopamine-dependent function. When your dopamine is depleted, your willpower is depleted. It is not motivation. Motivation is the feeling you get after you start, not before. What separates them is this: they stop waiting for the right moment. They stop waiting to feel ready. They recognize that the discomfort they feel when they imagine quitting is exactly the same discomfort they will feel when they actually quit. So they might as well quit now, because the alternative is feeling this way forever. Here is a framework from behavioral psychology that makes this easier. Do not try to change your behavior. Change your environment. Your behavior is a response to environmental cues. If your phone is next to your bed, you will check it first thing in the morning. If there is junk food in your kitchen, you will eat it when you are stressed. If your computer defaults to opening social media, you will scroll without thinking. These are not moral failures. These are predictable responses to predictable stimuli. You change the behavior by changing the stimuli. Delete the apps. Not just log out, delete them. Put your phone in another room when you sleep. Install website blockers that require a password you do not have memorized. Unsubscribe from every email list. Turn off all notifications. Make the friction so high that the path of least resistance is the behavior you actually want. This is not about discipline. This is about physics. You are designing an environment where the default option is the healthy option, where doing the right thing requires less energy than doing the wrong thing. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. The anticipation of withdrawal is worse than the withdrawal itself. You are terrified of being bored. You are terrified of missing out. You are terrified of what it will feel like to sit with your own thoughts for more than 30 seconds. And all of that terror is happening right now while you are still stuck in the pattern. The actual experience of detox is uncomfortable, but it is not unbearable. And it is finite. 2 weeks of discomfort in exchange for a functional dopamine system. That is the trade. The question is whether you value your future satisfaction more than your current comfort. Here is what I wish someone had told me before I started this process. It is going to feel like you are dying. Around day 3 or 4, you are going to be convinced that something is fundamentally wrong. Your body will ache. Your mind will race. You will feel restless and anxious and irritable for no clear reason. This is not a sign that you should stop. This is confirmation that you needed to start. What you are feeling is your nervous system recalibrating. Your cortisol levels are dropping. Your dopamine receptors are rebuilding. Your prefrontal cortex is regaining function. It feels terrible because your body has forgotten what normal feels like. You have been running on stress hormones and overstimulation for so long that baseline feels like depression. Push through it, not by fighting it, by observing it, by recognizing that the discomfort is temporary and the pattern is permanent. Every time you feel the urge to scroll, to check, to consume, pause. Take 3 deep breaths. Ask yourself what you actually need in this moment, not what your dopamine system is demanding, what your body actually needs. Water, movement, sleep, connection. 9 times out of 10, the urge will pass if you just wait. The circuit fires. You do not react. The circuit quiets. You have just weakened the connection. Do this enough times, and the circuit stops firing automatically. There is one more thing you need to understand about dopamine. It is not binary. It is not on or off. It is a spectrum. Low dopamine feels like depression. Normal dopamine feels like contentment. High dopamine feels like motivation. Too much dopamine feels like anxiety. Most people are bouncing between too much and too little. They overstimulate, crash. Overstimulate again, crash harder. They never spend time in the middle range where actual life happens. The goal of this protocol is to stabilize in the middle, to build a dopamine system that responds appropriately to real challenges and real rewards without needing constant artificial stimulation. What does that look like in practice? It looks like being able to sit through a meal without checking your phone. It looks like being able to work on a difficult problem for an hour without needing a break. It looks like being able to have a hard conversation without shutting down or getting defensive. It looks like being able to feel genuine pride when you accomplish something instead of immediately searching for the next thing. It looks like ordinary life feeling satisfying instead of boring. That is the prize. Not happiness, not bliss, just baseline functionality. The ability to be present in your own life without needing to escape it every 10 minutes. If you made it this far, I already know something important about you. You do not just want to survive your own mind, you want to master it. This channel is not about magic promises. It is about real people sharing real tools that work in the real world. If this makes sense to you, subscribe to the channel. Not because I am asking, but because you deserve a place where you can learn to build the version of yourself you always knew was in there. Biology is destiny until you hack it. One final note before we end. This content is educational and presents research-based frameworks for understanding human behavior. It is not medical advice. If you are experiencing clinical depression or addiction, please consult with a qualified healthcare professional. What we have discussed here is based on neuroscience research and philosophical principles designed to help you understand the biological mechanisms behind behavioral patterns. The protocols described are tools for self-directed change, not replacements for professional treatment when needed. Use this information wisely and always prioritize your health and safety above content consumption.